When it comes to poltergeist activity, there is none more famous than the case of the Enfield Poltergeist. Between the years 1977 and 1979, Peggy Hodgson and her 4 children, Margaret, Janet, Johnny, and Billy, were allegedly haunted by at least one malevolent entity. The children lived at 284 Green Street in North London with their mother, whom had just gone through a bad divorce. During this time, the 2 sisters, Margaret and Janet, experimented with Ouija boards as a fun and exciting distraction. However, according to the girls, the exploration of the spirit world brought something back. In fact, it brought many things back. It began simply enough with small items, like teapots going missing, which by themselves were discarded as mere trifles. Yet, things soon took a more sinister turn. One night, Janet called out to her mother because hers and her brother's beds were shaking. When her mother came up the stairs, she told Janet and her brother to calm down. But then, the chest of drawers suddenly started to move towards the door of its own accord. The mother pushed the drawers back, only for it to move again, as though trying to seal the door shut and trap the family inside. The Hodgsons called the police. Constable CAROLYN HEEPS visited the house to investigate and witnessed the chair move 4 feet across the room. Skeptical, she tried to find evidence of invisible wires or anything else which could explain what she had seen.
And I saw it slide off to the right, about 3.5 to 4 feet before it came to rest. I checked for wires under the cushion of the chair and I could find no explanation at all.
After a full police investigation, the officers had to abandon the scene. There was no evidence of trickery and no law had been broken. It was not a police matter. When the media got involved, a photographer from the Daily Mirror witnessed objects being flung around the room, whilst everyone screamed in terror. A BBC film crew sent to investigate also felt the hand of a poltergeist at work, with the filming equipment being tampered with, rendering much of the footage useless. Members from the Society for Psychic Research, Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, were also contacted. Over a period of several months, they were witness to numerous supernatural happenings. Tables and chairs were seen to spin around and around on the same spot. Sofas would start levitating spontaneously. Stones were thrown by unseen hands. Coins materialized in front of the investigators. Dogs barked in empty rooms. All seemingly unexplainable.
You'll hear here the whistling first of all, and then the barking.
And here is this noise.
We got a dog in here.
In a desperate attempt to control the ghostly occurrences, the investigators emptied the room, which had heavy poltergeist activity, of all its contents. The next day, the iron fireplace had been ripped from the wall. One day, Maurice and a neighbor rushed over when they heard one of the 2 sisters screaming. When they arrived, they found Margaret at the top of the stairs, with her leg up in the air, seemingly being pulled by an invisible entity. The man took hold of her arm and tried to pull her back, but try as they might, she would not budge. However, the most well-known aspect of the Enfield Poltergeist case was the frequent possessions of the younger sister, Janet, by several entities. One of the eerie voices, which can still be heard on audio tapes today, is supposedly that of Bill Wilkins, a man who had lived and died in the house prior to the Hodgson family moving in. An 11-year-old Janet would take on Bill's deep, gruff voice.
I want you to tell me whether you remember what happened to you when you died.
Days before I died, I went blind. Then I had an hemorrhage and I fell asleep and I died in a chair in the corner downstairs.
Why can't Janet feel you?
I'm invisible.
You're invisible? Why are you invisible?
So much H-O-S-T.
The happenings at Enfield had all of the classic signs of poltergeist activity, which had been reported since Roman times. However, upon closer inspection, all is not as convincing as it first appears. The first discrepancy was a torn-out magazine article found in the house of another child-centered poltergeist case, Matthew Manning. This suggests that the sisters knew some of the hallmarks of poltergeist activity. Mysteriously, one of the first items to disappear in the Hodgson household was a teapot, a mirror image of Matthew Manning's case. Also, out of all the objects thrown or damaged in the house, the television set was never touched. Thus, if there was a poltergeist, it was surprisingly wary of the Hodgson's valuables. So, is there a suggestion that the sisters engineered the poltergeist activity? Investigators did catch Margaret and Janet bending spoons, as well as jumping off their beds flailing their arms around, purposefully acting possessed. In the famous photograph of Janet levitating in her bedroom, skeptics have noticed visible contraction of her muscles, suggesting that it was clearly an intentional jump, and not involuntary levitation. Such a feat would not have been too difficult for Janet, since she was a renowned gymnast at her school. In one interview at the time, Janet was asked by a BBC Scotland reporter, "How does it feel to be haunted by a poltergeist?" Janet replied, "It's not haunting," at which point Margaret interrupted with a giggle, "Shut up."
How does it feel to be haunted by a poltergeist?
It's not haunted. Shut up.
The girl's behavior throughout the interview is suspect. Constant giggling and nervous laughter is reminiscent of two teenage girls playing a prank. However, it must also be considered that the response was merely shy, nervous laughter, as they were being interviewed live. Years later, Janet, now all grown up, even admitted that up to 2% of the happenings was fabricated by her and Margaret. Maurice Gross, who remained convinced of the case's authenticity throughout his life, even attested to the fact that the girls liked to play tricks. Many experts have cast doubts in the Enfield poltergeist. Ray Allen, a practiced ventriloquist, states that Janet's gruff voice could easily be replicated by a student of ventriloquism, which Janet was. It would be easy then to discard this incident as the overactive imagination of two teenage geniuses. However, some of the events of Enfield go beyond the capabilities of the two teenage sisters. How were two girls able to tear an iron fireplace in the wall while nobody noticed? How could they have maintained a constant charade of objects being thrown and mysterious knocks being heard for a full 18 months? On one occasion, Maurice filled up Janet's mouth with water to see if she could still do the gruff voice of the entity, Bill. She could. The demonic voice did not come from her vocal cords, but from her false vocal cords. These are bands of ligament, which play little part in the production of sound. A normal person speaking with their false vocal cords would have a sore throat after 10 minutes or so. Janet would speak that way for up to 4 hours, with no physical repercussions. Maurice Gross, the researcher from the Society for Psychic Research, recorded up to 180 hours of taped interviews with the entity which possessed Janet. He has always maintained that the haunting was genuine. Besides the physical irregularities, another question would be the girls' motives. By the end of the 18 months, the Hodgson family would all sleep together in one room with the lights on. The mother, Peggy, went on to suffer a nervous breakdown. She would ask her daughters to avoid speaking of the happenings again during her lifetime. After the hauntings had calmed down, the mother continued to live in the house, even after her children moved out. She always believed that something was in the house, following her. When she died in 2003, Claire Bennett and her 4 sons moved into the house. After only 2 months they left, claiming that inexplicable occurrences haunted them. The case of the Enfield poltergeist is perplexing. Clearly some of the events were faked, others could have easily been engineered. However, many happenings remain a mystery. The haunting appears to have been somewhat genuine. It could very well be that a poltergeist manifested itself in the Hodgson household, feeding off the tension produced by 2 adolescent girls experiencing a family breakdown, welcomed in through the door opened by a Ouija board. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe for more of the paranormal. And if you cannot get enough of ghosts and ghouls, then check out this video about ghostly photographs.
Reverend Lord decided to photograph the interior of his church. He never thought he would capture such a menacing figure. This well-known image has received a lot of attention in the years following 1963. Most speculation has concluded that the cloaked apparition resembles a 16th century monk.